Well, I think Mary said it all when, about, maybe I'll add to it, that I work as a dementia, caregiving, and grief specialist. And today I'm going to be speaking to you on coping as a caregiver. And the subtitle is, It Takes Brains, Heart, and Courage. That might sound familiar to you. Coping is something that we do on a daily basis, whether it's something for a small challenge that we face or a big challenge that we face. It is the means of dealing with small or big challenges of situations and circumstances. And as caregivers, we certainly have that on a daily basis. Now, what is coping? I just defined it. There is no coping 101 in university. There's no coping in elementary school that's taught. There's no coping in secondary school, but it's a topic. Coping is a topic, and coping is something that we have to do, like I said, on a daily basis. It's the same with, as Karen was speaking about finances and long-term care planning, often this is something that you don't get an education on. And often when it comes to coping, there are two different kinds of people. There's proactive and there's reactive. And the two do not get along. The proactive person and the reactive person are so on extremes with one another. As Karen had indicated, for long-term care planning, it's optimum when you are proactive. But unfortunately, a great deal of people are reactive. They act when there's a crisis or when they need to act. So proactive coping is optimum, such as the family discussions. That usually comes from a proactive rather than a reactive person. And planning your finances, advanced planning, that is all proactive stuff. So if you yourself are assessing, am I proactive or am I reactive? Think about what you want to do with regards to what Karen was talking about in long-term care planning. Are you going to take action? Are you going to be proactive? Or do you know people that are reactive where you're proactive? Because you have to deal with family members as well. And dealing with family members is a big part of caregiver coping. In this presentation, we're going to use the story of the Wizard of Oz to illustrate coping based on that story. It's a story that most people know because most people have watched the movie, The Wizard of Oz. But just to give you a review, Dorothy, who is not shown in this slide, Dorothy landed in the land of Oz and was by accident with her dog Toto and wanted to get back home and was advised, I'm getting a little, technical with the story, but was advised to go to the Wizard of Oz, who will help her to get back home. Along the way, she met 3 characters. One of them was the Tin Man, shown in the slide, and he had a challenge. He had the challenge of not having a heart and wanted a heart. She also met up with the Scarecrow, who had the challenge of not having a brain and wanted to have a brain, and also met up with the Lion. And the Lion, his challenge was courage. So he wanted courage. And Dorothy asked them each to join her to go to the Wizard of Oz. So how did they cope along the way in getting what they needed? So they followed the yellow brick road, which was the way to the land of Oz, and they had an obstacle. And in coping, often we have to overcome obstacles, and the obstacle was the Wicked Witch. But they managed to get through the obstacles and made it to where the Wizard of Oz was. But when they met with the Wizard of Oz, as you see in the above photo, the Wizard of Oz was not that receptive to giving them what they wanted. So there was another obstacle they had to cope with. And the Wizard of Oz was very frightening. And the Lion, who was, needing courage and got very afraid, if you remember the scene when the Wizard of Oz showed himself like a ball of fire instead of being in person, and spoke in a very loud voice that was quite frightening, he instructed them to get the Wicked Witch's broom. Now, how are they going to do that? So they had to put their heads together. But before that, the Lion got so scared that you may recall that he went running down the hall and out the window. And that's a way many people cope. They run away. They run away from the problem. I wrote a book called Keeping It Together: How to Cope as a Family Caregiver Without Losing Your Sanity. And just as a side note, I was at a show where I met up with and I spoke with a caregiver, and the caregiver said to me, how to cope as a family caregiver without losing your sanity. That's part of the prescription of being a caregiver. You have to expect that you're going to lose part of your sanity. So maybe I should have titled it Without Losing All of Your Sanity. So it made it more normal that you feel like you're going crazy as a caregiver. Anyways, in the book, as the author, I list a number of different ways, styles of coping. And you may identify with one or some of the styles that, may be habitual on how you have coped historically. And one of them may be, and probably not people who are here, because you're not running away from the situation. You are here to get tips, but there are people whose style is, and you may know of these people, that run away from problems. They run away from challenges, very much like the Lion did when he got scared. So other styles is the head in the sand, which is a little different than running away. You kind of in denial. This is not happening. This is just not happening. And I did community outreach social work in dementia care for about 10 years. And when I did this work, there were many caregivers that I saw that, you know, this is just an image, but really they were in denial. And in the literature, I've even read that Alzheimer's can take, you know, the life course of the illness can be over 10 years. So it can't even be a coping strategy of denial that caregivers go into because they cannot face what is happening. And it helps them to be in denial. So whether it's a good coping strategy, I'm not going to comment on that because I say that facing reality, acknowledging what is happening is best. But there's something that you have to have a bit of compassion for people who are in denial. And I go by the philosophy that people are doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. And that's all of you as well. You're doing the best that you can with the resources that you have. So that's enough on denial. Another coping style, and you may relate to this or know of people that are like this, is getting angry or lashing out at others. At a workshop, one of the participants, whose wife was living in long-term care, and he was visiting her every day. One day he was driving home from the long-term care home, and he got into a road rage incident where he actually went out of the car and started screaming at a driver for going in front of him. And he reported this in the group and saying that, because we were talking about coping and he related that incident to the tension that he was experiencing, seeing his wife every day in the long-term care home and visiting her. Because caregiving does not stop when, as some of you may know, when the family member moves into long-term care. The caregiving just takes on different meaning, or it's a different role, it's an advocacy role, but you're still there. And you are actually, it can be very difficult because you're seeing the decline of your family member and you're witnessing this. So it's a real loss that you're experiencing while advocating, while still acting as a family caregiver. So there's anger. Okay, then there's the fearful one, the worried person, the one who ruminates. Everything is doom and gloom. When you face challenges, can you relate to that? The rumination, the not being able to sleep, to thinking, overthinking, and worrying to the point where it's a health risk to the caregiver. And it's a style. It could be historically faced with challenges. It's so difficult. And caregiving is not something we choose, right? It falls upon us. It's an obligation. And we want to do the best we can as family members. But some people are not, their coping style does not fit with coping as a caregiver because it's a job. It is a job. And a lot of people don't even identify that it's a role, a caregiver. They don't identify as caregivers. They may be spouses. They may be daughters. They may be daughter-in-laws. They may be sons, whatever. And it's important to really be able to identify with it, realize that it is a job and a responsibility. And if you're not able to do it, to take some action as far as getting help so that you can do it, or you can transfer it to somebody else or get more family involved or whatever. So that's just a few. There's also the people pleaser, that, you just want to please everybody. The person that wants to fix everything. You're the fixer. You're always the one with the solution. So those are a few of the styles that there's other ones that are in the book, but just to let you know. And then there's how do you cope? And the best way to cope is to have a toolbox of tools, of strategies that are going to help you to cope. And this is the work that I do, is to help family caregivers cope. And I've, in the book, there is a strength-enhancing regimen for people to follow, which includes, as many of you know, and you may even be sick of hearing it, but you hear it a lot because it is so important. Self-care. Self-care, self-care, self-care. Blah, 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 blah. Enough with self-care already. I even changed the words just to get people to be more receptive to it. On my website, I put it as self-nurturing. So maybe people will think differently about it, but it is so, so important to take care of yourself. You've probably heard of the oxygen mask analogy. If you can't take care of yourself, how can you take care of others? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm saying that because of my own experience in helping caregivers. So many say, yeah, but I'm too busy. Yeah, you can say that. I don't have the time. Well, make the time, because it's that important. It is that important. Self-care. Getting respite, relief, taking time for yourself, pampering yourself. Caregivers, you see the word give in caregiving? That's give to you and love yourself enough for the wonderful work that you're doing. So self-care is one of the elements. The other one is caring. I had mentioned about responsible caregiving, in that it is a job. An example of responsible caregiving is when a person with dementia gets agitated. Loss of impulse control is part of the experience. Some of you may have experienced this with family members or seen that. And the person with dementia can be provoked a lot easier and go into aggression needlessly. Interaction is very important. So the caregiver needs to be cognizant of that. So what do what does the spouse do when historically they've been the Bickersons? That's how they have interacted with each other for years and years, and little bickering and fighting and whatever. And then one of the spouses gets dementia, and if you start bickering or disagreeing with that person, they're going to escalate, and they may even get physical. So responsible caregiving is de-escalating, is to redirect, not to argue, and you learn that. That's responsible caregiving, because you are diffusing the situation rather than escalating it. So that's just an example of responsible caregiving, of taking on the role. And care can be applied to anything, like your work life, your life with your family in the care section. It's just the responsibilities of everyday living. Especially you're an adult, right? And then the third element that we're juggling, if you didn't notice it's juggling for strength, is grief. And that is something that you're not going to see anywhere else. Because as a grief specialist, I have developed a model to address the losses that people are experiencing while caring for an ill family member. It was specific to dementia originally, but it has been generalized to all chronic illnesses, because things change when you have a family member, and you may not, it gets buried, let's put it this way, it gets buried. The grief can get buried underneath the demands of care. It's overlooked. And that's one of the elements, is to address the grief. And this is the tool that I developed, the coping tool that I developed to address loss for caregivers. It's called, the components are acknowledge, assess, assist. Acknowledge the adversity and loss. Face reality. Remember the denial? Face reality. Assess the impact, the reaction, and assist with strategies. Anything that helps. Anything that helps. And you can include grief strategies that often are used in death circumstances, most often in death circumstances, because people associate grief mainly with death. But there's so many losses where grief strategies can be applied. Now, acknowledge, assess, assist can also be like one word, hashtag acknowledge, assess, assist. And there is hashtag acknowledge, assess, assist for anybody who is on Twitter. You can check that out. And that is because you are assisting just by acknowledging and assessing. And they're words of action. It's a tool for you to self-monitor with self-awareness. So it's very empowering. So from a loss lens, there are three principles to acknowledge, assess, assist. The first one is wherever there is adversity, there is loss, situational loss. And this is the definition that is in Mosby's medical dictionary. I did not make up this definition, but it is all-encompassing in defining situational loss. The loss of a person, thing, or quality resulting from alteration of a life situation, including changes related to illness, body image, environment, and death. So when we're dealing with an ill family member, the losses can be ambiguous, meaning they're not clear, so they don't get recognized. So the reaction, even you yourself, may disenfranchise your own grief reaction because it's not socially sanctioned. Do you get condolences for, I'm so sorry about your ill family member? That doesn't really happen like in a death. The grief is accepted. It's expected, actually, that in a death, people are going to grieve. But it's not expected in loss due to illness. And the grief is not anticipatory, because there is such a thing as anticipatory grief, where you're anticipating the death in the future. And that's a different, it's grief, it's present grief, it's grief. Nothing before it. You're experiencing it, and you're experiencing it now. So here's an emotional whirlwind with so many different emotions that can be your reaction. And often you can have certain reactions that are prominent. The most prominent ones that I see people talk about is guilt, feeling guilty. But there's also fear, loneliness. Karen spoke about loneliness and how many caregivers also isolate themselves and consequently are lonely, which is a health risk. Numbness, fretful, overwhelmed. Oh, that being overwhelmed, I think, as a caregiver is huge. There's so much, because you're taking on another person. It's like everything to do with taking care of them, acting on their behalf. It's overwhelming. It is overwhelming. And this is a truth. And caregivers need compassion for that, for being overwhelmed. You can't give them a book of 300 pages to read to help them, because they're so overwhelmed, they're not going to read that book. There's only so much caregivers can do, and professionals need to understand that. So this is reaction. Now, there's more reaction. It could be behaviors, not sleeping well, not eating, or eating too much. That is a reaction. So acknowledging and assessing, how are you reacting to this? And it's not just about the caregiving. There's grief here. There's grief here, unfortunately. We acknowledge the situational loss process. You have the initial loss of health of your family member, and then there's related and unrelated losses, like you could lose your social network due to a family member. Loss of the role that maybe a spouse played in the family. The bill payer, the cook. It's a loss. Finances. And then there's the reaction to these losses. So it's a flow chart, really. And then based on this is how you cope. You cope with, if your reaction is guilt, you're going to be coping differently. If your reaction is fear, differently. Anger, differently. Overwhelmed. It's going to all affect how you cope. But when you self-monitor with self-awareness, you can be on top of it. And you can help yourself by obtaining tools, addressing, so to help with better coping strategies, regardless of what your history of coping or your style of coping has been. So the fourth A, I told you about acknowledge, I told you about assess, and I told you about assist. But the fourth A is to allow, is to give yourself permission to help yourself. And allow yourself to self-monitor with self-awareness. Allow yourself to grieve. So what does that look like? If you're feeling rotten, don't fight it. Don't fight it, because what you resist persists. Maybe you need a day to just lie on the couch and pamper yourself and feel out the pain and or speak to somebody. Let them know how you're feeling, somebody, a confidant, somebody you trust. Cry. Crying is a strength, and seeking help is a strength. It's not a weakness. You might want to journal. In grief, journaling and writing your feelings is really helpful. Not everybody can journal, or you don't have to journal every day. You might want to journal every day, or you may, from time to time, write a poem, or just write something down and tear it up. Write a letter to the family member who is ill. Let them know how you're feeling about the illness. You don't have to show it to anybody, but it's better to get those feelings out than to repress and keep it in. We live in a culture that encourages you to have a stiff upper lip, to keep going, to not even display emotion. So you have to pick and choose who you display your emotion to, right? Or you can just take a blanket, maybe a good movie one afternoon, and just lie on the couch and do something to pamper yourself. Self-care. So it falls into self-care, that juggling regimen. So allow yourself to see. Okay, you notice see is spelled S-E-E-E. So it's not like, well, you can see, like you're acknowledging and assessing, so you're seeing it, but what do you think S would be? Okay, I'll tell you. Sleep and rest. The other E, exercise, as Karen had mentioned as well. The other E, eating right. Don't go hungry. Moods go down when you're hungry. And the third E, enjoy. Enjoyment counters grief. And don't feel guilty about it, because if you're enjoying yourself, you're going to be a better caregiver. You're going to be a better caregiver. And do these things every day. It's not like, oh, I took a weekend off and I enjoyed myself. I went out for lunch with a friend. I'll do it again next month. No, 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 no. Every day, frequently, we have to keep it up. We can't, we do it one time and then you let it go. It's not going to happen, right? Allow yourself to accept assistance. Let other families in. You may be saying, they're not helping me or they're not doing this. You got to ask yourself, are you reaching out? Are you asking for help? Or are you assuming or expecting help without asking for it? Or letting people know that you're receptive to help? And don't put it on yourself. That caregiving takes more than one person, really, for the sake of your own health. So these are some strategies to help you using the 3A, Acknowledge, Assess, Assist tool to self-monitor with self-awareness. If you want to speak to me more about it, I do offer a half-hour telephone coaching session complimentary. So just email and set up a time with me. I'd be happy to speak with you. So coping is easier with support through thick and thin. Going back to the Wizard of Oz characters, they all got what they needed and were looking for in the end. And they did it with the support of each other. So there's my contact information. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience, and I'm sticking around this morning, so if you want to speak to me at all. Thank you.